So this past Sunday, we had a gospel reading from the gospel account of Luke. This is Luke chapter 7. Jesus and a crowd of people go into a town called Nain. They encounter another crowd of people it's a funeral procession. There's a man, the son of a widow, the only son of a widow, and he's died. And these pallbearers are carrying this man on a bier, kind of like a stretcher. They're going to the grave. Jesus interrupts this funeral procession and he gives life back to the man. And he gives the man back to his mother. It's this beautiful thing. It literally happened. It was a real thing that historically happened. At the same time, it's interesting to look at this story and how Luke describes this story and see that it's almost a mirror of Jesus and his journey to the cross, and reflected in this man and his journey to the grave in his funeral and how Jesus interrupts that. At the same time, there's also this really cool parallel going on between this man being raised from the dead literally and you being raised from the dead spiritually, your own sort of journey of faith as God brings you back from the dead and then hands you over to your mother, the church. So, let's get into it. There's an interesting theory that at this point in the history, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is a widow. Now, this is based on a few things. First of all, Joseph, the husband of Mary, the adoptive father of Jesus, Joseph is no longer being mentioned. Joseph is mentioned previously. He's mentioned, of course, in the nativity account. He's mentioned when he and Mary pick up Jesus from the temple. Didn't you know I would be in my father's house? That whole incident. So he's mentioned in those instances. But at this point, since Jesus is grown up and he was baptized in the Jordan and all this, Joseph isn't being mentioned anymore. He's not mentioned in Jesus's adult life and ministry. So based on that piece of information and the piece of information that when Jesus is dying on the cross, he gives Mary over to John, says, "Behold your mother," and Mary, "Behold your son," gives them to each other to take care of. The people assume, okay, well, this wouldn't have happened if Joseph was still alive to take care of Mary. Therefore, based on these two pieces of information, they conclude that it is very possible that Joseph has died at this point and that Mary is a widow. This means the confrontation, the interaction between these two groups in our gospel reading in Luke chapter 7 is the mirror image is all the more clear. So you have on one hand, you have the son of a widow, the only son of a widow, Jesus, and he's got a crowd of people following him and he's going into the town. And on the other hand, you've got the only son of a widow and the crowd of people and he's dead and the crowd is following him and he's going out of the town. And these two people going in opposite directions meet and interact with one another. Jesus is not a sinner. Jesus does not sin. The wages of sin is death, but because Jesus did not sin, he did not deserve death. Jesus, presumably, if he had not gone on to die on the cross, could have gone on to live forever because, again, death is a consequence of sin, and since Jesus didn't sin, he didn't have that consequence. On the other hand, this man who's coming out, he has already died because he was a sinner. Remember, the wages of sin is death. Everybody who dies was a sinner. Everybody's a sinner, except for Jesus, of course. So again, this mirror image of these two people going in opposite directions. This one man is going literally to the grave, whereas Jesus is going, he could have kept going on to live forever. But Jesus stops and he reverses both of their courses. This man is going, funeral procession to the grave. And Jesus stops him, and Jesus instead goes to the grave. Jesus instead goes and dies on the cross and is buried in the tomb. Meanwhile, this guy, instead of being dead, his course is reversed, and he's brought back to life again. Jesus stops these pallbearers, these people carrying the bier, and he resurrects this man and gives him the life that he does not deserve. This man died for his own sins. Jesus gives him back his life, which he doesn't deserve. Jesus deserves his own life, but died for the sins of all. You see how this is a mirror image. Now, there's also a parallel aspect to this story. Again, historical, literal, did happen, really happened. But at the same time, there's a parallel aspect in your own salvation. Think about it like this. When Jesus encounters this person who's being carried on the stretcher, on the bier or whatever, he stops him. He stops him by putting his hand on, actually, before I get to him stopping it, Jesus sees this widow who is in distress and this man who has died, and he has compassion on him. And this isn't just, our English word for compassion, but this is that special Greek word for compassion that is only ever used for God or for a character in a parable who represents God. It's a variation of the word splachnitzomai. The splanknik, your organs, your innards, that's being twisted. That's what that means. Splachnitzomai. He has an actual visceral, and I use that word intentionally, visceral reaction to the pain of another person. He has an emotive response to somebody else's pain. He sees somebody and he has compassion in so much as he sees it, and he hurts for them. Inwardly, he grieves for them. He feels pain for them. Jesus sees this dead man and the widow who has lost her son, and he has splagnitzoma. He has compassion. In the same way, he sees you when you were dead in your sin, and he loves you, and he had compassion on you, which causes him to then act. So Jesus comes up to this funeral bier, and he stops him. He puts his hand on the bier. Now, this is carrying a dead person. Jesus has just interacted with a funeral procession. If you interact with a dead body, you become ritually unclean. You take on the filth of death. Jesus takes on the filth of the death of this person, and in exchange, he gives this person life. He becomes filthy. He takes death upon himself, and later, of course, he would die on the cross as well, so that this person can have life and be cleansed. Likewise, Jesus has taken on the filth of your spiritual death, the filth of your sin, and washed you clean in baptism, so you are no longer covered in your own filth of your own sin. That's taken on by Jesus and deposited on the cross. Then Jesus does something after stopping the procession. He speaks to the widow. He says that it's time to stop crying. It was perfectly appropriate that she was grieving up to this point, but that he is going to remove the reason for her to grieve. And this is obviously what he's going to do with the resurrection. He then speaks to the man, the dead man. Now, biologically speaking, corpses don't tend to listen. They don't hear very well, and they usually don't respond. Jesus, however, is God, so he's not bound by these biological restrictions. So Jesus speaks directly to this corpse, and he says, "I say to you, get up." And the corpse does. The man gets up and he sits up and he starts talking. Likewise, Jesus sees you completely dead in sin and trespass. And again, corpses don't respond. They don't hear, they don't react, they don't move, they don't make a choice for Christ, right? So Jesus sees you. He has compassion on you. He stops the funeral procession. He takes the filth of your sin and your death upon himself. And then he speaks to you, specifically to you, and says, "I say to you, get up." He imparts faith and grace into you specifically. Knowing you by name, he calls you to be alive again. And then he gives you life. So then the man sits up and starts talking. Likewise, you, now being alive in faith, no longer being spiritually dead, have the ability to proclaim, to pray, praise, and give thanks, to proclaim the gospel to other people. It's a wonderful thing that you have now that you can speak, now that you're alive again. The parallel continues because Jesus then takes this man, and it says that he gives this man who is now alive, he gives him to his mother. And presumably to take care of his mother and for his mother to love him and take care of him. The parallel here is that your spiritual father is God the Father, and your spiritual mother is the church. Look to Ephesians 5. Jesus is the groom, and the church is the bride. There's this represent this. I say that this miracle or that this mystery represents Christ in the church. This is what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5. So Jesus not only brings you to life, not only gives you the capacity to proclaim his word and to pray and praise and give thanks, but then he takes you, not leaving you alone, he takes you and gives you over to the church so that the church can continue to take care of you, to help you with word and sacrament, with fellowship, with baptism, with the Lord's Supper, with having other people who can support you and help take care of you. And at the same time, you get to support your own mother, the church. You get to volunteer your time. You get to offer your prayers. You get to volunteer monetary goods. You get to support your mother, the church, in the same way that she takes care of you. It's this wonderful, beautiful mutual relationship between the Christian and the church, and the fellowship of all believers. So with this, we have this historical, literal, really happened account of Jesus bringing a man, the son of the widow of Nain, bringing this person back from the dead. And this not only is a mirror of Christ going to the cross and Christ taking on death when he didn't need to take on death and giving life where the person didn't deserve life, but also a parallel of your own salvation where Christ intervenes directly in your life, gives you faith, calls you to repentance, gives you life, and gives you over to the church so you can be loved. And this is how he takes care of you. I hope you enjoyed that. God bless and take care.